Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Rainy Night Ride. It was a rainy night, the kind where the world outside feels like a half-forgotten dream shrouded in mist and mystery. The rhythmic tapping of rain on the windshield created a steady, soothing lullaby as I navigated the slick, glistening streets. My headlights pierced the darkness ahead, illuminating nothing but reflections of wet pavement and streaks of falling water. I was working my usual late-night shift as a rideshare driver, and though the roads were quiet, I was used to the stillness by now. When a notification popped up for a new ride request, I pulled over beneath the flickering light of a lonely street lamp, my wipers swishing back and forth with metronomic grace. As I waited, I scanned the shadows beyond the rain-streaked glass, looking for signs of movement, a silhouette, or someone rushing through the downpour. From the darkness he emerged, a man in a hooded coat, his steps deliberate, his face partially concealed by shadow and rain. Without a word, he opened the back door and slid into the seat, his motion smooth, practiced, and utterly silent. I greeted him with a polite smile, trying to catch his eye through the rearview mirror, but he didn't return the gesture. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed firmly on something outside the window, as if he were watching for something or someone. In the distance, we drove in silence. The only sounds were the steady beat of the rain on the roof and the soft hum of the engine, and yet a strange heaviness settled over the atmosphere, like we weren't alone in the car at all. As we neared his destination, an odd tension began to grow, filling the confined space of the vehicle with something intangible, but very real. I glanced at him through the mirror, noticing how he fidgeted in his seat, his hands tightly clenched into white-knuckled fists on his lap. I asked if everything was all right, my voice low but steady, and he responded with a quick nod, curt and emotionless, never once looking at me. There was something in the way he moved, the way he breathed even, that stirred an ancient instinct in me, a kind of primal unease that I couldn't explain. The GPS indicated we were minutes from his drop-off point, but I had the sinking feeling this ride was far from over. Just as I was preparing to pull over, the man leaned forward, his voice low, gravelly, almost trembling with something I couldn't name. He asked me to keep driving. The urgency in his tone cut through me like a cold wind. Before I could respond or even process the request, he suddenly reached forward and gripped the steering wheel with a strength that startled me. His hands were iron, and his grip was unshakable. I yelled at him to let go, trying to wrest back control, but his hands wouldn't budge. My car veered off the road under his forceful direction, leaving the safety of the lit streets behind and plunging into the unmarked, unpaved paths that lay ahead, swallowed by darkness and storm. My mind raced, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. I shouted for help, but the rain muffled my voice, swallowed it into the roar of the storm. He didn't speak again, his eyes wild, his grip relentless. Trees flanked us on either side now, their branches reaching like skeletal hands across the path. The road, or what was left of it, narrowed until it was no more than a trail, the kind carved by animals or the lost. And still, the car moved forward, driven by something stronger than will or reason. Every fibre of my being screamed for me to escape, to flee, but I was trapped, locked in the cab of a car commandeered by a stranger with unknown intentions. Then I saw it. A light, a small, flickering glimmer in the distance, faint but unmistakably there, a beacon through the thick curtain of rain. Something in me surged, an instinct older than fear, and I acted without thinking. I flung open the driver's side door while the car was still in motion, letting in the icy sting of wind and rain. I leapt from the vehicle, the ground slamming into me hard, scraping skin and jarring bone. But I didn't stop. I rolled, got to my feet and ran. Behind me I could hear the car skidding, the man shouting, the crack of tree limbs snapping, but I didn't turn back. My lungs burned with each breath. My muscles ached. but I pushed forward through the dark, drawn toward that single light ahead. The terrain was uneven, covered in thick underbrush and puddles that soaked my shoes, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear him behind me. His footsteps, his voice, unhinged and echoing in the storm like some monstrous chant. I tripped, fell, got back up, my hands and knees muddy and scraped. The light grew brighter, closer, and I prayed it was real, not some hallucination born of fear. Finally, I stumbled out onto the edge of a narrow paved road. A car approached in the distance, its headlights like angels descending from the heavens. I staggered into the lane, waving my arms, my voice hoarse as I screamed for help. The car slowed, then stopped. The driver jumped out, their face stricken with horror as they saw me soaked, bloodied, wild-eyed. They pulled me into their vehicle without question, wrapped me in a blanket from the back seat, and called the police as I sat shivering, trying to explain through gasps and tears what had just happened. When the authorities arrived, I recounted every detail, where I'd picked the man up, what he'd looked like, what he said, how he'd tried to take over the car. The officers promised to investigate immediately, dispatching units to search the woods, but something about the way they looked at me, the mix of disbelief and pity, told me they didn't expect to find him. At least not easily. That road he'd forced me down. It wasn't marked on any map. And the light I'd seen, there was no house there, no lamppost, no known structure for miles. In the days that followed, I tried to return to a normal routine. I went back to driving, but I couldn't take night shifts anymore. Every time it rained, I felt the dread creep back into my chest, the memory of his hands gripping the wheel, the forest swallowing my car. The nightmares were the worst. Sometimes I'd dream that I was back in the car, unable to escape, the man whispering things I couldn't understand in the darkness. Other nights, I'd wake up certain I'd seen him outside my window, watching. I told myself it was trauma, that my mind was just trying to process the fear, but deep down I wasn't sure. Sometimes trauma is a mask for something real, something that follows you long after the danger has passed. Months later, I received a call from the police. They'd found the car miles into the forest, flipped and rusting beside a stream. There was no trace of the man, no footprints, no evidence, no signs that anyone had even touched the car since I abandoned it. But inside the vehicle, tucked beneath the passenger seat, was a notebook. A single name was scrawled on the inside cover, mine. The rest of the pages were filled with strange symbols, drawings of eyes, trees, roads that twisted and looped impossibly. The investigators couldn't make sense of it, and neither could I. They asked if I wanted to keep it. I said no. I told them to burn it, but some nights I wonder if they did. And if they didn't, where it is now. What still haunts me most isn't the man or the night, or even the madness of the woods. It's the light, that glimmer in the distance, shining through the darkness, pulling me towards safety, or at least, what I believed was safety. I've never found any explanation for it, and no one else has seen it since, but sometimes, late at night, I dream of it. And in those dreams, I see the man again, standing at the edge of the forest, watching me with those hollow, unblinking eyes, and behind him, far in the distance, that light flickers on once more, like a beacon or a lure. Story 2. The package at the door. It was an ordinary evening in my apartment, the kind where everything feels still and predictable. I was cooking dinner, the sizzle of the pan blending with the warm aroma of spices that wafted through the air, making the small space feel cozy and alive. The hum of domestic routine brought me comfort, as the golden light of the kitchen cast soft shadows along the walls. I wasn't expecting anyone, and certainly not anything out of the ordinary, so when I heard the knock at the door, it startled me slightly. It wasn't aggressive, just a soft, deliberate tap, but it was enough to pull me from my thoughts. I paused, spoon in hand, my senses suddenly alert in the silence that followed. I waited, hoping maybe I imagined it, but then it came again, sharper this time, with a curious urgency that I couldn't ignore. I made my way toward the door, peering cautiously through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps echoing away, no sound of movement, just the quiet hum of the building's lights and the faint buzz of distant traffic. I hesitated, my hand on the knob, unsure if I should open the door. But something about the stillness was even more unsettling. I slowly turned the handle and pulled the door open. And there, resting on the welcome mat like a misplaced gift from the universe, was a small package, brown paper, neatly folded, tied with twine. My name was written on the top in perfect, deliberate handwriting. No return address, no label, just my name, and something about that simplicity unnerved me. I picked up the box, my fingers trembling slightly as I closed the door behind me. The weight of it was strange, not heavy, but not light either, balanced in a way that made me feel like it had been placed there with care and intention. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it, unsure whether to open it or throw it away. Logic told me it could be harmless. Maybe a neighbor mistook my unit for theirs, maybe a forgotten order. But something deeper, older inside me told me not to trust it. The air in the room had shifted. The warm aroma of spices now seemed too thick, too close. I could feel my heart beating louder than the ticking of the clock. I sat down across from the package, staring at it for several long minutes. It felt as if the box was staring back. A subtle dread crept over me, but curiosity gnawed at the edges of that fear. Slowly, almost ritualistically, I untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside was a layer of fabric, soft white linen. I unfolded it, and then froze. Lying at the bottom of the box was a severed hand, pale, lifeless, and curled slightly as if it had once held something tightly. I jumped back, the chair scraping the floor with a sharp screech as I recoiled in horror. The hand was unmistakably human, its fingernails well trimmed, the skin wrinkled and cold-looking. I gagged, my knees weak, barely catching myself on the counter as I struggled to comprehend what I had just seen. I stood there, shaking, unable to look away but terrified to keep staring. I dropped the box, its contents spilling onto the floor with a muted thud. The hand rested on the linoleum like it belonged there, its wrist jagged and raw. My breath came in short, uneven gasps as my brain raced through every possibility. A prank, a threat, a warning. I scrambled to grab my phone, but before I could make the call, a noise stopped me cold. A faint thump, like something heavy falling, came from the living room. I turned slowly, the knife rack suddenly in my periphery. I reached for the biggest one, clutching the handle so tight my knuckles went white, and crept toward the sound, every nerve in my body vibrating with tension. The room was empty. Nothing was out of place, but the feeling was unmistakable. Something had been there, or worse, was still there, hiding just out of sight. I stepped lightly, scanning corners, behind furniture, checking the windows. Everything was locked. Everything was still. And yet, I felt watched. Not like someone was looking through the window I had just left. This was something more intimate, something crawling beneath the surface. I backed into the kitchen, never turning away from the shadows. My eyes scanned every inch of the apartment again and again, but found nothing. Still, the feeling lingered like static clinging to skin. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat with a knife in hand, the box still on the floor, the severed hand now wrapped again in the linen and placed inside as if trying to undo what had already happened. I kept every light on, every curtain drawn, every door locked tight. Morning came slowly, with pale sunlight that seemed too soft to belong in a world where things like that could arrive at your door. I finally called the police. When they arrived, I explained everything, trying to sound calm, trying to keep my voice from shaking. They took the box, photographed everything, asked questions. They promised to investigate, but their eyes said what I already knew. They had no answers, no leads, no clue where the package had come from. Days passed, then a week. The fear didn't leave. If anything, it grew sharper, more refined. I started noticing little things out of place. My shoes moved an inch to the left. My towel folded differently than I remembered. Drawers slightly ajar. At first, I chalked it up to stress, the residue of trauma. But that explanation began to feel more like a lie. One morning, I woke up and found my toothbrush missing. Nothing else touched. Just that. The next night, I heard something breathing behind my bedroom door, soft rhythmic inhales. But when I opened it, the hallway was empty. Whatever had started with that package, it hadn't ended. It had only begun. I moved not long after. I changed cities, changed jobs, changed everything. I told myself I was starting over, but I kept the knife by my bed, and I installed cameras, alarms, locks, and motion lights. I still don't know who sent that hand, or why. The police never found any fingerprints, no record of shipment, no evidence. It was like it had appeared from nowhere, placed by invisible hands, and while I never received another package, the memory lingers like a scar that doesn't heal. Every knock at the door makes my heart race. Every unexpected envelope fills me with dread. I live quietly now. I trust no one. Because once something like that touches your life, once that darkness finds you, it never really lets go. Story 3. The Highway Stranger. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Just me, my thoughts, and the endless highway stretching out beneath the stars. I'd been driving for hours, the hum of the engine keeping me grounded, as the road unfolded ahead of me like a black ribbon through the desert. The landscape on either side was a blur of sand and shadow, the kind of empty that makes you feel like the last person left on earth. My car had been making strange sounds for a while, but I ignored them. I didn't want to stop, not out here, not in the middle of nowhere. But when the engine finally sputtered and died, I coasted to a halt on the shoulder, surrounded by nothing but the vast, indifferent desert. I stepped out into the dry, silent air, the smell of dust and motor oil, lingering as I popped the hood, hoping for something simple. But it wasn't simple. I didn't have the tools or knowledge to fix it, and my phone, of course, had no signal. I leaned against the car, trying to stay calm, but a growing unease began to settle over me like a second skin. The road behind me was pitch black, the only light coming from my own hazard lights blinking slowly into the void. Then, just when the silence became unbearable, I saw headlights cresting the horizon, growing larger, brighter, closer. A truck. I stepped into its beam and waved, hoping for a kind stranger. The truck slowed as it approached, the massive grille looming like a beast in the dark. The driver rolled down the window and leaned out. A man in his 50s maybe, with leathery skin and a crooked smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He asked if I needed a ride, and I hesitated. Something about him felt off, like a painting that's beautiful from a distance but unsettling up close. Still, the desert didn't leave me much choice. I nodded and climbed into the passenger seat, grateful for the escape, if uneasy about the company. The cab smelled faintly of tobacco and something else I couldn't place, something metallic and sour. At first he made small talk, asked where I was headed, how long I'd been driving, if I had family nearby. I gave vague answers, watching the miles roll by as the road narrowed and the landscape grew darker. But then the questions changed. He asked if I lived alone, if anyone knew I was out here, if I told anyone where I was going. I felt the hairs on my arms rise, but I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. He chuckled too, but there was no humor in it. Just a quiet, low sound like a predator waiting to pounce. And then, without warning, he took a sudden turn off the main road onto a dirt path that disappeared into the night. I asked him where we were going, trying to keep my voice steady, and he replied with a grin, saying he had a surprise for me. My stomach dropped. The words were wrong, too casual, too rehearsed. I scanned the dashboard for anything sharp, any way to call for help, but my options were limited. The truck rattled along the uneven path, headlights bouncing across twisted trees and low brush. The road narrowed until it was little more than a track carved through the desert by forgotten wheels. My instincts screamed at me to get out, to run, but I was trapped, boxed in by steel and darkness, and the man beside me. Then the truck slowed. We came to a stop in a clearing with nothing around but rocks and cacti, and a distant hum of desert wind. The driver turned to me, his face illuminated only by the dull glow of the dashboard. He said something that made my blood turn cold. How he liked to take his time, how the chase was half the fun. And then he lunged. His hands shot out toward my throat, his fingers digging in as I thrashed and kicked, screaming for help that wouldn't come. I fought back with everything I had, flailing and shouting, but he was strong. His eyes were wide with something wild and gleeful. Just when I thought it was over, when my vision was starting to blur, I heard it. Headlights in the distance, tires on gravel, another car. The driver heard it too. He froze, his grip loosening for a split second, and I took the chance to shove him hard against the door. He cursed and scrambled to regain control, but I was already throwing the passenger door open and tumbling out into the dirt. The other vehicle pulled up fast, an old SUV, its engine still running as a man jumped out and ran toward me. I gasped out what happened, my voice ragged with panic, and together we watched as the truck's driver sped off into the desert, his taillights vanishing like fading stars. The man, my unexpected savior, drove me to the nearest town, where I collapsed into a chair at the local diner, still shaking. He stayed with me while I called the police, my voice barely holding together as I told them everything. They took notes, asked questions, promised to search the area. But I could see in their eyes that the chances of finding him were slim. The desert is wide. It swallows people. It buries things. And he knew how to disappear into it. I retrieved my car later, towed in by a quiet man with kind eyes who didn't ask any questions. I got it fixed. But I haven't driven down that highway again. It's strange how quickly danger can find you. How easily a quiet night can turn into a memory that scratches at the back of your mind every time you close your eyes. I often think about what might have happened if that second car hadn't appeared. If no one had come down that road. If I'd trusted a little more. Or a little less. I tell myself it's over. That I survived. But sometimes late at night, I still feel his presence. Not the man exactly, but the feeling of him. The way the air felt heavy beside him. The way the desert seemed to grow teeth the moment I climbed into his truck. That sense of being prey without even knowing it. I don't take rides from strangers anymore. I don't drive through the desert without a full tank and a working signal. And I never, ever ignore the feeling in my gut again. Because that feeling, that flicker of dread, that whisper that says something isn't right, isn't fear. It's survival. It's the one thing standing between you and the kind of night that never really ends. The kind that waits in silence, just beyond the edge of the highway, in the dark places where headlights never reach. And every time I pass a hitchhiker, every time I see an old truck parked on the side of a lonely road, I wonder, was it him? Is he still out there, waiting for another chance? Story 4. The Hidden Village in the Jungle. I had always been drawn to the wild places of the world, the unmarked trails, the dense jungles, the whispered stories of lands untouched by time. So when I set out alone into the deep heart of the forest, I wasn't afraid. I was hungry for something more, something ancient and real. Days passed as I made my way deeper into the green labyrinth, guided only by instinct. A compass, and a map that hadn't been updated in decades. The jungle was alive with sounds, bird calls, rustling leaves, distant howls, but it never felt threatening. Not until I came across the village. Hidden in a clearing, surrounded by towering trees, it appeared suddenly, like a mirage. Thatch-roofed huts, narrow dirt paths, and silence. It felt as if I had stepped through a curtain and into another world. I approached cautiously, unsure if I'd be welcomed or chased away. The villagers emerged slowly, their expressions unreadable, their dark eyes following me with a quiet intensity. They wore hand-woven garments and moved with an eerie, synchronized grace. I tried to greet them, using basic gestures, hoping to show I meant no harm. They didn't speak. Not to me. Not to each other. They simply watched. After a tense moment, one of them beckoned me forward. I followed, unsure of the rules, unsure of what I was walking into. I spent that first night in a small hut they offered, lying awake on a mat made of reeds, listening to the jungle pulse outside, and wondering why I didn't feel safe. Over the next few days, I observed their routines. They worked in silence, harvested food from the forest, and painted strange symbols on the walls of their homes using dark, oily pigments. I tried asking what the symbols meant, drawing them in the dirt and pointing, but my questions were met only with blank stares. There was no joy in the village, no laughter, no play. just the rustle of leaves and the low, rhythmic hum they chanted at dusk. I began to suspect that I had stumbled into something not meant to be found. There was an order to their silence, a ritual to their movements, and the more I watched, the more I felt like a trespasser in a place older than language. One night, as the moon climbed high over the jungle canopy, I wandered through the village, unable to sleep. That's when I heard it. A low chant, rising in waves like the hum of insects, but distinctly human. I followed the sound to the village's center, where a great fire burned. The villagers stood in a circle, swaying gently, their arms raised toward the flames, and in the middle of the firelight, something else stood, something wrong. It was a figure, hunched and twisted, with limbs that didn't bend like they should. Its face was obscured by a mask or perhaps by something that was part of its skin. I froze, hiding behind a nearby hut, watching in horrified silence as the villagers bowed before it. The figure spoke. Its voice was like a blade scraping against bone, harsh, unhuman, layered with a tone that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the spine. The villagers repeated its words, their chants growing louder, faster. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Something in me screamed to run, but I was trapped by the sheer unreality of what I weighed. Then, all at once, their heads turned. Every single villager looked directly at me, their eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, their mouths still moving in perfect unison. The creature turned too. Though it had no visible eyes, I felt its gaze pierce me, like it could see my thoughts laid bare. I stumbled backward, knocking over a basket. The sound broke the trance, or perhaps it triggered something far worse. The villagers began to move, slowly, deliberately, surrounding the fire and blocking the paths out. I turned and ran, heart hammering, crashing through the village and into the jungle beyond. Branches tore at my skin, roots tangled my feet, and the darkness felt like a living thing trying to swallow me whole. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The chanting still echoed behind me, growing fainter only after what felt like miles. I ran until my legs collapsed beneath me, until I could no longer tell whether I was breathing or sobbing. When I finally stopped, I was deep in the jungle, the stars barely visible through the canopy above. I built a fire and waited for daylight, flinching at every sound, imagining eyes in every shadow. The next morning I tried to retrace my steps, to find the village again, not to return, but to confirm I hadn't imagined it. But it was gone. The trail I thought I followed vanished. No paths, no symbols, no clearing, just endless green. It was as if the jungle had swallowed the village whole, erasing every trace of it, except the memory burning in my mind. I searched for days, but I never found it again. I returned to civilization a different person. I told no one. How could I explain a village that shouldn't exist? A creature that defied nature, a ritual that seeped into my bones and left a stain no water could wash away. But I couldn't forget. At night, I still hear the chant in my dreams, rising and falling like the tide. Sometimes I wake up sweating, certain that someone is standing in the corner of my room, watching, silent and waiting. And once, I found a symbol carved into my front door, the same symbol I saw painted on their huts. I moved that week, but I haven't felt safe since. I don't know what the villagers worshipped or what I interrupted that night. I don't know if it was a god, a demon, or something else entirely, something older than those words. But I do know this: there are places in the world we were never meant to find. Places that keep their secrets because they must, because knowing them costs more than most of us can bear. I ventured into the jungle searching for adventure. What I found was a door to something vast and unknowable. And though I walked away with my life, I left part of my soul behind in that clearing, still echoing with firelight and a voice not meant for human ears. Story 5. The music inside the walls. It was a quiet evening, the kind I usually cherished, just me, my guitar, and the soft hum of city life filtering in through the windows of my apartment. I had a small gig coming up, and I was lost in the rhythm of the chords, letting the familiar vibrations soothe the tension of the day. The music floated gently through the room, a comforting wave of notes echoing off the hardwood floor. But then something changed. At first, I barely noticed it, just a strange sound beneath the music, a soft melody that didn't belong to my guitar. I paused mid-strum, letting the silence settle, and that's when I heard it more clearly. Faint notes, like a piano, or maybe a violin, drifting from the far wall of my living room. It was subtle, haunting, and impossibly beautiful. Curious and a little unnerved, I set my guitar aside and pressed my ear to the wall. The music was definitely coming from inside it, not from a neighbor, not from another room. It wasn't muffled like something coming from an apartment next door. It was clear, like the melody existed within the walls themselves. I stood there for a long time, listening, entranced by the soft, melancholic tune that seemed to be calling to me. There was something oddly familiar about it, yet I knew I had never heard it before. My heart began to race, not from fear exactly, but from the sense that I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to hear. I spent the rest of the evening trying to ignore it, turning on the television, going through old messages on my phone, even picking up my guitar again. But the melody continued, rising and falling gently behind the wall like a forgotten lullaby. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I started tapping on the wall, searching for hollow spots, something to explain what was happening. Near the far end of the room, just behind a tall bookcase, I found it. A loose panel, slightly shifted, its edges dustier than the rest of the wall. I moved the bookcase aside, pried at the panel with a screwdriver, and after some effort, it came loose with a low creak. What I saw behind it chilled me. There was a room, a small, hidden space nestled behind the wall like a secret pocket. It was dimly lit by a strange soft glow, as if the air itself carried light. And inside that space, arranged in delicate symmetry, were dozens of musical instruments, violins, cellos, harps, all aged but perfectly preserved. And in the center of it all was a grand piano, worn but regal, as if it had been waiting for someone to open it again. But I didn't notice the instruments first. What froze me in place was the figure sitting at the piano. It was translucent, barely more than a shimmer in the air, but its hands moved with slow, deliberate grace across the keys. The music I had heard was coming from it. I should have run, closed the panel, and forgotten I ever opened it. But I didn't. I stood there in stunned silence, captivated by the ghostly figure and its beautiful, mournful tune. The figure had no clear face. Its features were blurred as though smeared by time, but its presence felt heavy, ancient. It didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, just continued to play. And I watched, helpless to do anything else. The longer I stood there, the colder the room became. Not just the secret room, but my apartment too, as if the chill were leaking through the panel, threading its way into every corner of my home. Still, I stayed, caught between fear and wonder. After what felt like hours, the figure stopped. The final notes hung in the air like mist, lingering longer than they should have, and then it turned toward me. No eyes, no mouth, just a suggestion of a face, but somehow it looked directly into me. I felt everything stop, my thoughts, my breath, my heartbeat, as if the world had paused. It didn't speak, but I felt words in my mind, not sentences, just feelings, sorrow, longing, a deep ache of something unfinished. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure faded, dissolving like smoke. The piano stood silent and still. The instruments were unmoving, and the light within the room dim-dumb to nothing. I backed away slowly, replaced the panel, and slid the bookcase back in front of it. I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. Was it a spirit? A memory left behind? A haunting? The questions spun endlessly, but I had no answers. That night, I left the lights on and barely slept. I kept waiting to hear the music again, but the silence was absolute. Days passed, then a week. The wall remained quiet, but the memory clung to me. Every time I picked up my guitar, I felt like I was mimicking something greater, something I had witnessed but could never recreate. Eventually I moved. I couldn't stay in that apartment, not knowing what lay hidden behind the wall. I told myself it was for the best, that whatever I had seen wasn't meant for me. But some nights, when the world is still and my thoughts are louder than sleep, I hear it again, the faint melody, drifting at the edge of consciousness, and I wonder if the figure is still there, playing for no one, lost in a room no one remembers. Was it ever real? Or did I imagine the entire thing? I don't know, but I never found that level of beauty in music again. It was like hearing the language of grief itself. And now every song I play feels like an echo of something just out of reach. People talk about haunted houses like they're full of screams and shadows, but the truth is more complicated. Sometimes hauntings aren't violent or loud. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in notes and longing, drifting through the air like a forgotten song. And when they find you, they change you subtly, permanently. I used to play music to feel alive, to feel joy. But now, every melody carries a weight, a memory, and a question. Who was that figure? Why did it play? What unfinished business echoed through its fingers? I may never know, but I still carry the song it left behind, not because I want to, but because I can't forget. Story 6. The Roadside Diner. As a food critic, I've always prided myself on my adventurous palate. Over the years, I've tasted the bizarre, the exquisite, the bold, and the questionable from every corner of the country. So when I was assigned a piece on hidden culinary gems in the Deep South, I accepted the challenge with enthusiasm. The charm of small towns, the whispers of passed-down recipes, and the smoky allure of roadside barbecue were more than enough to lure me into the back roads and forgotten highways. One dusty afternoon, after hours of driving through quiet fields and wooded stretches, I stumbled upon a quaint roadside diner. It looked old, worn from time and weather, with peeling paint, and a faded sign that simply read Eats. The porch was lined with creaky rocking chairs, all empty, swaying slightly in the warm breeze. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of grease and something else. Something earthy. Iron just faint enough to raise a question, but not quite an alarm. A few patrons sat hunched at their tables, their eyes glued to their plates. No one spoke. No one looked up. I seated myself at the long counter and was greeted by the owner, a tall, wiry man with a lined face and eyes that seemed far too cold for someone running a restaurant. He handed me a single-page menu with only one dish highlighted at the top in red ink. Today's special. When I asked what it was, he smiled thinly and simply said, "It's what everyone's having." I nodded and placed my order, jotting notes into my leather-bound journal. I told myself that maybe this place was just a little behind the times. Some towns are like that. Slow-moving, full of locals who don't take kindly to outsiders. But the unease crept in anyway. As I waited, I glanced around, taking in the outdated decor, the dusty jukebox in the corner, the sepia-toned photographs of unnamed people, the crooked clock that had stopped ticking long ago. The patrons, though silent, occasionally glanced in my direction. Not curious, not rude, just measuring. It felt like they were waiting for something, or maybe watching to see how I'd react. My meal arrived, steaming and fragrant. It looked delicious, some kind of stew, thick and rich, served with a slab of cornbread. I was starving, and despite the gnawing discomfort in my gut, I took a bite. The taste was intense, deep, complex, meaty with hints of spice and something vaguely metallic. At first I thought it was just an unusual seasoning blend, but as I continued eating, a bitter aftertaste began to grow, one that seemed to coat the back of my throat. I slowed down, then pushed the plate away. My stomach churned. I felt lightheaded, disoriented. Something wasn't right. I asked what kind of meat it was, and the owner, still smiling, just said it's local, very fresh. My hands started to tremble. I asked to see the kitchen, hoping to ease my suspicions. He shook his head. "Only the staff goes back there." That was when I noticed the scar on his neck, a deep, jagged line that disappeared into the collar of his shirt. Something primal in me screamed to leave, but as I stood, he stepped around the counter and blocked my path. "You haven't finished your meal," he said, still smiling. His voice was calm, but there was steel behind the words. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer, the eyes of the diners now fixed on me. I tried to remain calm, reaching into my pocket for my phone, but he grabbed my wrist with a grip that was startlingly strong. "Sit down," he said quietly. "We don't like waste here." Panic surged through me. I yanked my arm away and backed up toward the door, but another man, one of the silent diners, stood and moved to block it. That's when I realized this was no misunderstanding. This wasn't just bad service. This was a trap. I didn't know what kind of game they were playing, or what was really in the food, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. And just when the fear threatened to overwhelm me, the bell above the door jingled. A group of travelers entered, a family by the looks of it, loud and cheerful. Their presence changed the mood instantly. The man blocking the door returned to his seat. The owner stepped back, and I seized the moment. I slipped past the newcomers and out into the blazing sunlight, heart pounding, mouth dry. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys, and drove off without looking back. My hands trembled the whole way, and even after I reached the next town, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I spent the night in a motel, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over, the way they watched, the taste of the stew, the silence, the smile. The next morning I contacted the local authorities. They said the diner didn't exist, hadn't in years. The building had been condemned, burned down in an electrical fire nearly a decade ago. I didn't believe it until they drove me to the spot. The lot was overgrown, nothing left but blackened wood and scattered debris. I felt sick. Had I hallucinated the entire thing? Was I drugged? Or had I stumbled into something far older and darker than anyone wanted to admit? I checked my phone's location history. It showed a gap, an hour with no signal, no record. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. But even now, I still remember the taste. I never published the article. I still write, but I stick to cities now. Chain restaurants, big names, places with cameras, crowds, lights. I never take detours, never follow signs that say home cooked. And sometimes, when I'm on the road, I pass little towns with diners that look just a little too old, a little too quiet, and I wonder, was I the first person to walk into that place, or just the first to walk back out? I keep my windows up. I keep my doors locked. And I never forget the look in the owner's eyes. Because it wasn't just hunger, it was possession. And in that moment I knew I wasn't a guest. I was the meal. Story 7. The farmhouse visit. It was supposed to be just another visit. As a social worker, I had been to dozens of homes in rural areas, and this one didn't seem any different. Just a family in need, tucked away on a remote piece of farmland outside town. I remember the sky that morning, overcast and heavy, the kind that presses down on your shoulders like a warning you can't quite read. I drove for over an hour, the highway giving way to gravel roads, then dirt paths that twisted deeper into a landscape that seemed untouched by time. As I reached the property, a creeping sense of unease began to settle into my chest. Something about the silence, the absence of animals, and the stillness of the air, it all felt wrong. I pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The farmhouse was old, the paint peeling, shutters hanging askew, like drooping eyelids. I stepped out of the car, calling out a friendly greeting. No response. The wind rustled through the overgrown grass, and a distant crow gave a single caw before flying off. As I approached the house, I noticed the door was ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I paused. I've seen many things in my line of work, poverty, illness, neglect, but nothing had ever made me hesitate like that open door did. Still, I had a job to do. I knocked loudly and waited, then stepped inside. The interior was chaos. Furniture overturned, broken dishes scattered across the floor, deep gouges in the wooden walls that looked like they had been made by something, or someone clawing to get out. The smell hit me next, sharp and metallic, layered with rot. Blood. My stomach twisted. I called out again, my voice echoing through the empty house. But there was still no answer. The living room looked like it had been ransacked. But not recently. Whatever had happened here wasn't fresh. I stepped carefully, trying not to disturb anything, documenting what I could in my notebook with shaky hands. It was clear that something terrible had taken place. I made my way through the house room by room. The kitchen was worse, stains on the floor, an overturned table, broken glass everywhere. And then I heard it. A soft sound like crying coming from upstairs. My heart froze. then began to pound. I called out once more, "Hello? Are you okay?" But the crying didn't stop. I slowly climbed the staircase, each step creaking beneath my weight. The hallway above was dim and narrow, lined with faded family photos that seemed to watch me as I passed. I followed the sound to a bedroom at the far end and pushed open the door. In the corner, huddled in a ball, was a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, her face streaked with tears, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. I approached slowly, kneeling down to her level, whispering soft words of comfort. She didn't speak, didn't look up, just sobbed quietly. I noticed a long scratch down her arm, partially scabbed over, and a thin, dark bruise around her wrist. My instinct screamed that she had seen something she couldn't put into words. I gently took her hand and told her we were leaving, that she was safe now, that everything was going to be okay. But I didn't believe my own words. We made our way downstairs, and as we stepped outside, I looked around one last time. The land was quiet again, eerily so, as if even the insects had gone still. I carried her to the car, locked the doors, and called the police. Within minutes, sirens pierced the silence, and I felt the smallest flicker of relief. When they arrived, I handed the girl over and recounted what I'd seen. They listened with grim faces and nodding heads, then began their search. I stayed long enough to see them disappear into the barn behind the house, their flashlights bobbing in the shadows. I couldn't bring myself to follow. I didn't want to know what they would find. Later that evening I got the call. They had found remains. Human remains. More than one, buried beneath the floorboards of the barn. They didn't say who or how long they'd been there, only that the family I had come to check on was gone. Not missing, gone. Vanished, except for the little girl, who hadn't spoken a word since I found her. Authorities launched an investigation, but no one ever came forward to claim her. No relatives, no neighbors, nothing. It was as if she had come from nowhere and survived something unspeakable. She was placed in protective care, and I was asked not to follow up. But she never left my mind. Months passed, and I tried to forget. I buried myself in work, avoided rural calls, and told myself it was over. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of that house, of the crying girl, of the claw marks on the walls, and the silence that seemed to hold its breath. I wonder what she saw, what she survived, and why she alone had made it out. I wonder if whatever had taken her family had seen me too, and simply let me go. And in my darker moments I wonder if I walked away too soon, if that house still stands, if something still waits inside, behind that creaking door, just beyond the edge of the fields. Now, every time I visit a new home, I knock a little louder, I watch a little more closely, and I never, ever ignore that feeling in my chest, the one that warns me when something isn't right, because the world isn't always kind. Sometimes it hides its horrors behind a smile, a front porch, a child's cry, and sometimes those horrors are patient, waiting for someone to come looking. Someone like me, someone like you. And if you ever find yourself at the edge of a forgotten road, staring at a farmhouse with an open door, listen to that voice inside, because some doors lead to answers, but others lead to something you won't be able to walk away from. Story 8. The Masked Men on the Highway. It was late, later than we usually stayed out, and my girlfriend and I were finally making our way home after visiting friends. The road stretched long and empty ahead, the headlights of our car cutting narrow paths through the inky darkness. We had taken the scenic route home, a quiet 2-lane highway that wound through rural stretches of forest and farmland. At that hour there were no other vehicles, no glowing gas stations, just the soft hum of tires on asphalt and the rhythmic blinking of distant reflector signs. The rain had stopped hours ago, but a damp mist still clung to the trees and hovered just above the ground like breath that refused to fade. We were chatting quietly about nothing in particular when we rounded a bend and saw it, a makeshift roadblock across the road. My hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel as the beam of the headlights illuminated a group of men, standing motionless in the middle of the lane. Their faces were covered with dark masks, plain, featureless fabric stretched tight across their skin, with only small holes cut for the eyes. They stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the road completely. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. My foot eased off the gas as the car rolled to a stop 20 yards from the line of silent strangers. The scene felt unreal, like something from a bad dream or a low-budget horror movie. One of the masked men stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate, his hands hidden beneath the folds of a heavy coat. He stopped just a few feet from the car and tilted his head, as if examining us. Then he raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I froze. My girlfriend whispered, "Go," but my instincts were tangled in panic and uncertainty. Before I could react, the man tapped the glass with something hard. I looked down to see a knife glinting faintly in the light. My mind snapped into motion, and I reached for my wallet with trembling fingers. He gestured with the blade, and I understood immediately he wanted everything. I passed my wallet and phone through the small crack in the window, trying not to make eye contact. My girlfriend did the same, her hand shaking as she surrendered her things. The man stepped back, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then another man stepped forward, holding what looked like a crowbar. I started the car, trying to gauge whether I could swerve past them or reverse without crashing. That's when a third man appeared beside the car, emerging from the trees like a ghost. He slammed a hand on the hood, and I floored the accelerator. The tires spun briefly on the slick pavement, then caught. The car lunged forward. The masked men scattered just enough for me to maneuver around the edge of the roadblock. I heard something strike the back window. A fist or a rock. I couldn't tell. My girlfriend screamed and I kept driving, faster than I ever had on that winding road. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the sound of the engine, the wind, and even her panicked voice beside me. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. Not until we reached the outskirts of the nearest town, where the lights began to return and the roads grew wider and safer. We pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner and sat in silence, both of us shaking, drenched in sweat despite the cool air. I called the police, stumbling through the words, trying to describe what we had seen. They listened, took down the information, and promised to investigate. But the officer's tone was lukewarm, skeptical even. "Pranks," he said. "Locals trying to scare out-of-towners. Happens sometimes, but this hadn't been a prank, not with weapons, not with that kind of menace in their eyes. This had been something else, something calculated and dark and quiet." That night we stayed in a motel near town, too afraid to continue driving. I double-checked the locks and kept a chair propped under the doorknob. Neither of us slept much. Every sound outside made us jolt. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long, linger too close. The next morning we returned to the police station to follow up, but there were no reports of roadblocks, no footprints found, no signs of activity along that stretch of highway. We even drove back through the area, during daylight this time. Nothing was there. No debris, no tire marks, just trees and silence. In the weeks that followed, I checked the news obsessively. I searched forums, local crime reports, even social media posts, hoping someone else had seen what we did. But there was nothing. Like it never happened. My girlfriend eventually stopped bringing it up, though I could tell it haunted her too. We avoided that route from then on, taking longer roads, safer paths. Even now, years later, the memory returns uninvited. When I pass a curve too slowly, when I see headlights rise over a hill at night, when the road ahead suddenly feels too empty. People often think the scariest things come with noise, blood, screaming. But sometimes the quiet threats are the ones that linger longest, the ones that wear masks and say nothing, that don't need to speak to be terrifying. The highway became a place I feared, not because of what I saw, but because of what could have happened. The uncertainty, the feeling of being completely at someone else's mercy, miles from help, from understanding, from reason. That kind of fear doesn't vanish. It just recedes like a tide, always threatening to rise again when the conditions are right. We still don't know who those men were, or what they wanted beyond money. Were they just thieves, or were we lucky to escape something much worse? I don't have the answer, and I probably never will. But I do know this: if you're ever driving late at night, and you see a group of people standing in the road wearing masks, turn around. Don't stop. Don't ask questions. And don't assume that silence means safety, because sometimes the darkest intentions speak without saying a single word. Story 9. The truck that wouldn't leave. We had planned the road trip for months, a chance to escape our routines and spend time together without distractions. My wife and I packed light, filled the tank, and hit the open road with the windows down and music flowing. Everything started off beautifully. We passed rolling hills, sleepy towns, and winding stretches of highway that seemed to stretch into forever. It wasn't until the third day that things changed. Somewhere along a desolate stretch of highway flanked by dense woods and abandoned farmland, I noticed a truck in the rearview mirror. At first it didn't register as anything strange. Just another vehicle out here in the quiet middle of nowhere. But then it got closer. Closer than it should have been. Close enough that I could barely see its headlights without using the side mirror. I switched lanes. It followed. I slowed down. It matched my pace. I sped up. It did too. My wife noticed it almost immediately and sat up straighter in her seat, her voice low and uncertain. Why is it tailgating us? I didn't have an answer, but I could feel my pulse begin to quicken. We were on a rural highway, hours from the nearest city, and I hadn't seen a gas station or even a rest stop in miles. The truck had no markings, just a dull silver grille and mud-caked windows that reflected the trees like warped glass. I tried not to panic. Maybe the driver wasn't paying attention. Maybe it was a coincidence. Still, I took the next exit, hoping to lose them in a tangle of local roads. We turned down a narrow lane that curved along a small lake, then twisted into a tunnel of overhanging trees. I glanced back. The truck was still there. The same distance, same steady pressure, like it was tethered to us. I drove faster, trying not to show how tense I was. My wife began dialing the local authorities, but the signal was poor. Her call wouldn't go through. She tried again and again, holding the phone up to the window in vain. Eventually, we spotted a gas station on the horizon, an old one, worn and faded but open. I pulled in quickly, trying to look casual, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I parked beside the pumps and turned off the engine, heart pounding. We got out, keeping our eyes on the road. The truck passed. It didn't stop. No brake lights, no hesitation. It just kept going. We exhaled. Maybe it really was nothing. We refueled, stretched, and bought snacks from the dimly lit shop inside. The old man at the counter watched us closely as we paid, and when we told him about the truck, he didn't say a word. He just nodded slowly and said, "It happens sometimes. Keep moving." We got back in the car and rejoined the highway, the sunset bleeding across the horizon in streaks of orange and crimson. For a while, it was quiet again. The sky darkened, the road emptied, and we thought maybe we'd left it all behind. But then, somewhere past mile marker 113, we saw headlights again. Not far behind, not speeding, just there. My stomach sank. The truck had found us again. I didn't understand how. We had taken side roads, exits, turns. There was no way it should have been able to track us, but there it was, gliding behind us like a shadow. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I just drove. Every time I glanced in the mirror, it was still there, not gaining, not falling back, just waiting. I turned down another side road, this time toward a stretch I remembered from the map, an old logging trail that looped around a forested ridge. I thought if we could just throw it off one more time, we'd be safe. But the trail grew narrower, rougher, more isolated with every mile. The sun was gone now. The world was a patchwork of black trees and distant stars, and still, it followed. My wife whispered that we needed to stop, that we needed help, that we needed people, but we were far from any place that felt safe. Eventually we reached a clearing. An old ranger's station stood at the far end, boarded up and long abandoned, but we parked near it anyway, hoping the openness would deter whoever was behind the wheel. We shut off the car and sat in silence, watching the tree line. Minutes passed. No headlights, no sound. Just the gentle rustling of leaves and the chirp of crickets that felt too loud in the quiet. Then a soft crunch of tires. The truck eased into view from the shadows of the trees, slow and deliberate. Its engine idled low, like it was breathing. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. The doors didn't open. No one got out. We sat frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then started. I put the car in gear and reversed out of the clearing, spinning onto the road with gravel kicking beneath the tires. The truck remained still, unmoving, but we didn't wait to see what came next. We drove straight through the night. No more exits, no more detours, just the highway stretching on until the first light of dawn painted the sky pale and merciful. We didn't stop until we reached the city. The moment we hit traffic, we finally felt like we could breathe again, but neither of us spoke the rest of the way. We filed a report with the highway patrol, but there wasn't much to tell. No plates, no markings, just a presence that followed and watched. There was nothing they could do. The truck hadn't broken any laws. It hadn't even touched us, just trailed, observed, threatened in silence. Days turned to weeks, and we never saw the truck again. But even now, on quiet roads and long drives, we both keep watch. We check the mirrors. We look for those same headlights. And sometimes, when the sun dips low and the road begins to feel too empty, we feel it again, that feeling of being followed by something that wants you to know it's there, but not why. The scariest thing that night wasn't the truck itself. It was the intent, the deliberate slowness, the calculated persistence, the way it never rushed. It didn't want to scare us. It wanted us to unravel slowly, to doubt ourselves, to be afraid of what it might do, rather than what it actually did. And in a way that was worse. It left us with a story no one could prove, and a fear no one could take away. And so now, every road trip begins with a promise between us. Stay in the light, stay near people, and never, ever trust the silence behind you. Story 10. The Man at the Campsite. It was a last-minute decision to go camping. My friends and I had grown tired of the constant pull of technology and noise, and we thought a weekend in the woods would give us the kind of peace we hadn't felt in years. There were 5 of us, 2 couples and a single friend named Matt, who was always up for adventure. We packed our cars, loaded our gear, and headed toward a national forest we'd read about but never visited. The drive took most of the day, winding through hills and narrowing roads, until finally we reached a small, quiet trailhead. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing near a stream, but it was perfect for what we wanted. Isolation, stars, and stories around a fire. The first night was wonderful. We set up tents, built a fire, and cooked hot dogs over open flames. The air was crisp, and the trees around us swayed gently in the breeze. The nearest town was almost 30 miles away, and we had no signal, which was the point. We shared stories, laughed under the stars, and finally drifted off into our tents with full stomachs and clear minds. But sometime during that first night I woke up. It wasn't a sound that stirred me, but a sensation, like being watched. I lay there for a while, listening to the wind in the trees, the babble of the stream, the shifting of leaves. Then I saw it. A figure, faint and unmoving, standing just beyond the fire's dying glow. At first I thought it was Matt going to the bathroom, but the figure was too still, too tall. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. It wasn't doing anything, just standing there, as if observing our camp. My breath caught, and I blinked, trying to make sense of the shape. But then, just like that, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, an overactive mind reacting to the eerie stillness of the forest. I rolled over and forced myself to sleep. The next morning I didn't say anything. I didn't want to spook the group, and no one else mentioned anything strange. So we went about our day, hiking, cooking, laughing. It felt normal again. That night, the unease returned. As we sat around the fire, sharing more stories, we heard a crack in the woods, loud, deliberate. We all went quiet. Matt called out jokingly, probably a deer, but his voice wavered. We shined flashlights into the trees, saw nothing, and moved on. But the atmosphere had shifted. The fire didn't feel warm enough. The woods felt too quiet, and every shadow felt a little too deep. When we finally turned in, I lay awake for hours, ears tuned to every sound outside my tent. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, measured, circling the camp. I stayed still, barely breathing, waiting for them to stop. In the morning, Matt's face was pale. He said he thought he saw someone standing at the edge of the woods during the night. He wasn't sure, didn't get up to check, but the fear was there in his eyes. This time, I told them what I had seen the night before. We agreed not to panic. There were other campers out here, maybe hikers taking a shortcut, maybe someone lost. We rationalized it. But still, we packed everything up and decided to move to a different location. It wasn't far, just over a ridge, deeper into the forest, closer to a known trail. It made us feel safer, like distance would somehow keep the strange away. The new spot was beautiful, nestled between tall pines with a view of the valley below. But that night the fear came back stronger than ever. As the fire burned low and the night crept in, we heard something that chilled us. Humming. A low, tuneless hum that seemed to come from all around. Never close but never fading. We called out again, got no answer, and sat silently, watching the fire as if it were our only shield. None of us slept. We sat in pairs, taking turns keeping watch, flashlights in hand, hearts pounding. The humming stopped after a few hours, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. At sunrise, we made a unanimous decision to leave. We packed everything in record time and started hiking back to the trailhead, but the sense of being watched never left. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone just behind us. At one point we found footprints, not ours. Large, deep, circling our camp from the night before. None of us spoke. We just kept walking faster now. When we reached our cars, we didn't celebrate or joke. We just got in and drove. Once we were back in town, we reported the incident. The ranger we spoke to took notes, but didn't seem surprised. We get reports like that now and then, he said quietly. Could be a squatter, or just someone who enjoys scaring campers. We never went back to that forest. We still camp sometimes, but only in places with other people nearby. We talk about it occasionally. Matt still has nightmares, and I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed one more night. It wasn't just fear we felt. It was intent. Something or someone was playing with us, watching us, pushing boundaries just close enough to feel its presence without revealing itself. And that kind of terror, the kind that doesn't strike but waits, that lingers just out of sight, is the hardest kind to shake. To this day, I don't know what we encountered. Maybe it was a person. Maybe not. Maybe it was something that lives in places people forget, in the gaps between the safety of towns and the wildness of the woods. Whatever it was, it knew we were there. And it wanted us to know that it was there too. So if you ever go camping and wake up to find a figure watching you from the trees, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's nothing. Because in the woods, not everything you see is imagined, and not everything that walks on two legs is meant to be found.